Hey y'all. So this is impromptu, but like all of them are impromptu. Like y'all don't know when I'm uploading videos. Y'all don't know when I'm editing videos. It just is what it is. But anywho, this video is me fleshing out my thoughts because I was watching a YouTube video about like gender and sex and all the intricacies and nuances within this discussion. And a particular person, granted, full disclosure, this person identifies as a trans woman. However, she made really good points in regards to how sex and gender are social constructs. And full disclosure, cis hetero, and I'm very, y'all watch these videos, very XX. Like I go hard for the women, okay? But I am also a person who likes to critically think. I like to have different opinions, challenging my views, and eventually change my point of view. Or if not, I have more of a reason why I stand on whatever position. I'm not one of those people who like an echo chamber. I am one of those people who love knowing fun facts. So having new information is not an ego bruise, as opposed to like I'm just trying to better understand this thing called life, period. So this trans woman was like, well, sex and gender is a social construct because there's more, statistically speaking, there are more intersex people than there are redheads.
The question of gender is ultimately that of division of labor, but, and this is a big but, it cannot be reduced to the same thing as a class identity, which is also your point 4. So what do you mean by that? The question of gender is a function of division of labor, but it is separate and unique from class.
Yeah, well, I think that, like, ultimately, when we're looking at, it's quite easy to reduce sort of different, I guess, social categories into one another, so you can, kind of draw an easy comparison between gender and class, or gender and race is another one which is quite common. I think the problem here is that ultimately these things are constructed very differently. And we can sort of begin with how they appear, or at least begin with the sort of immediate experience of these things, which is that like the way in which we experience gender and the way in which we experience class are very different. So like gender, by its nature, has an identitarian component. I kind of resist reducing gender purely to identity in the piece, but it's quite clear that like people identify with their gender, their assigned gender, or the gender that they are living as, in the sense that they at the very least know what gender they're meant to be. So, the vast majority of people know that they are men or women, or at least know that they are meant to be men and women. Whereas, by its nature, class, people do not necessarily know what class they're a member of. They can be ensconced within all sorts of ideological structures. So, like, if we take, for example, like a proletarian may not recognize the condition of their life. They may consider themselves like a whole variety of, possible ways they can understand themselves ideologically, but they remain a proletarian. Whereas a woman or a man, by the sort of nature of that category, are aware of both themselves and the role of their social other. Men and women are aware of their kind of like the role that men and women are meant to play in society. So I think that on the immediate level there seems to be some differences. I think those belie a deeper distinction between gender and class. Ultimately, I think that gender relations or gender sex, I don't draw a hard distinction between those two categories, ultimately they reflect a certain sort of set of labor relations or a certain division of labor, but it is ultimately a cultural superstructural form that regulates those. So you're looking at a whole set of social and cultural markers that are directly linked to this gender category, such as modes of dress, colours, modes of speech, that aren't directly linked to the role that, say, the female sex, female gender, plays in the labour, in the social division of labour. The colour pink has very little to do with, like, domestic work, but it is intimately sort of associated in the Western context with femaleness. And I don't think that's the same as being proletarian. There seems to be a distinction here that's not immediately clear, but it's certainly worth unpacking.
Well, While there are multiple gender identities, even within the concept of, say, woman, familiar with, but why do you think that is? What is going on in the division between man and women beyond just, say, reproductive differences?
Yeah, well, I think that like we can draw this down to a fundamental division in the types of work that are expected of people and the various social, ideological structures that are meant to organize that work. So this is like kind of at the core of the social reproduction theory argument, right? Is that there's like a sort of world of reproductive labor that's necessary to reproduce social life, and that's seen as largely outside of what we might call the economy, I guess, or what is understood to be the economy. And I think that like there are a bunch of historical and anthropological debates as to the origins of this division. I think personally the division between public and private spheres is a huge part of this. That like there is with the emergence of there's a general trend with the emergence of settled societies, or societies become more settled. There's a tendency for a distinction between the public and the private world to develop. And certain forms of labor that occur within the private world are essentially seen as, we're naturalized, right? So like, it is natural for women to be carers, it is natural for women to raise children, it is natural for women to be domestic workers, because it occurs within the domestic sphere, which is private, which is hidden, and then, you have the public-facing world. I mean, I think this is like you can even see it in contemporary capitalist societies, to pull like a very pop cultural example here. You've got like, for example, men in a country like the United States. My hair is a mess. In the country like the United States, it is like cooking is broadly speaking, or in traditional, let's say like a 1950s housewife situation, because those things have changed a lot since the 80s, and that's probably worth going into. But like say a traditional like housewife situation, women cook if it's inside the home, but if it's outside the home, literally in like the garden in the form of like going on a barbecue or something, that's men's work. It's overwhelmingly men who like grill publicly. Like cooking publicly is seen as a man's job, but cooking privately is overwhelmingly done by women. And if you look at like celebrity chefs and like people who cook professionally, the gender division switches back towards men.
Right.
Even when the work itself is overwhelmingly done by women. I think that's really worth noting, right? Because you have this like situation in which if something is done in the home with socially necessary labor that is necessary for the daily reproduction and survival of the human race and of capitalist society, it is seen as not work, but just a normal part of human life. And it's seen as, it's naturalized. Sylvia Federici in Evolution at Point Zero, I think it's in Wages Against Housework, or maybe Sexuality as Work, I can't remember the exact essay, points out that like, it is seen as to be part of our feminine nature. Women are caring, women are kind, they are good at looking after children. They want to, it's part of their feminine nature. And they want to, and so that is this ideological, I guess, superstructural element of this division of labor that's happening in society in space.
Okay, so I find that these generalizations are true even in areas where we don't notice them. For example, I've talked about public versus private facing left work for left causes or whatever. The media sphere is overwhelmingly either male. We can get into transidentification here later because it does play in, but then or female people taking male-ish characteristics is almost ubiquitous, particularly among cis women on left media. But when you go do left activism, the gender roles are almost reversed, as if the activist role is seen as part of the private sphere, right? Another interesting one is work that is devalued because, not just because it is care work, but because it is seen as care work because women are more likely to do it, and it also makes men who do it suspect. And I'll give you an interesting example. In the English-speaking world, when you think of a male teacher, what grade levels are they working with? Or I mean, in Australia, what age levels are they working with generally?
A male teacher, overwhelmingly high school.
Overwhelmingly high school, secondary school at least, right?
Right. Yeah.
And in
rights.
And frankly, particularly, interestingly, heterosexual men involved in working with younger children. That, for a lot of people, and I've talked to cis women about this, talked to a bunch of normies, throws off a vibe of either predator or you're not what you say you are, like almost immediately. And the interesting thing about that, to me, is that it comports with what you're describing. Like, people are going, well, you're violating some unspoken, like not just cultural norm, but unspoken work differentiation, and in doing so, you are making yourself suspect. And that goes, of course, we see that with women, whether they're assigned women at birth or not. But we also we see that in the reactions even to certain kinds of heterosexual men, and I'm being very specific on my categories here, doing certain kinds of labor. It was just assumed that if you are doing that, there must be something defective about you, because one, it's devalued work anyway, and two, why on earth would a male want to be a caregiver to young children? They must have ulterior motives.
Yeah, no, totally. I think another example of this... Oh, sorry, no, you go. You finish.
No, go ahead. No, I'm not going to overspeak you. Go ahead.
Okay, well, on the activism division of labor stuff, this is definitely something that I've seen in my experience. Like, and even within activist spaces, you'll often see men being more willing to take on roles, or maybe not even more willing, but more readily able to speak up in order to speak on, especially media spokesperson like roles, and like often like theoretical roles. And you get a lot of like pigeonholing here as well, right? Where like if you're a woman or if you're a queer person, I think this also happens to people of color as well, though I can't really comment, where like if you're a woman, then you're expected to want to speak on women's issues. And like if there's like a discussion, like, if you're running discussion nights or reading groups or whatever, it's like, oh, well, you're a woman, so you want to lead the social reproduction theory discussion. And it's like, well, that's true, I do, but I also want to talk about, like, I don't know, imperialism and political economy and stuff that, isn't immediately like in the rubric of women's issues, which are the issues that you're meant to talk about and care about. Whereas men, this I guess is Simone de Beauvoir's point, right? Men are universal. Men are not specific. They don't have a specificity. They are universal subjects. They can and do discuss anything, talk about anything, because they can speak for humanity, and women cannot. On the point about like being suspect, I think this is true. I think it's like, at the very least, there's a sense of like defectiveness. For example, like if a man says, oh, the man who's like getting good grades at school and is going into the medical field says, I'm going to be a nurse, there's kind of like there's a sense of like, why are you not going to try to become a doctor? Or at the very least, a paramedic, which I guess is where the gender division swings back. Because it's a more action-oriented role, I guess. Or at least it's seen that way socially. But if a woman who's getting the same grade says, I want to be a nurse, then most people will be like, oh, good for you. That's a very respectable profession. I think that's very true. I mean, if you look at teachers in schools, overwhelmingly, women are dominant. And then if you look at school principals, like in my state, overwhelmingly men dominant.
Yeah, so it's overwhelming.
Yeah. I think that you, like, the further up you get up, management hierarchies, bureaucratic hierarchies, you see more and more men. And this is not an argument for, like, sort of corporate feminist, like, women in high places argument, but it shows the social division of labor here, where men are seen as active protagonists in the social world, where women are simply maintaining. I think that, like, you can also see this to a degree in academia. I think that, like, I'm very fortunate to attend a philosophy department that has, like, a lot of very strong women, but, like, men are still overrepresented in philosophy, like, heavily overrepresented, actually. It's one of the humanities disciplines that doesn't have, like, they tend to lean more towards women these days, but philosophy probably is one of the ones where it doesn't.
Philosophy
and I think
and
you can definitely still see
history,
that kind of...
are the two, objectively
Philosophy
speaking,
and
are the
history.
two. Yeah. Like, I mean, just as
if you go
an
into
English teacher. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, if you go into an anthropology or sociology lecture, it's going to be overwhelmingly women. I just think that's interesting. I don't really know what it says, but I think it's interesting. I do think that also Michel Ledoux, the French feminist, also notes that like when women do write academia, they are often, this is especially true in the French tradition, women are often sort of compartmentalized as like historians of ideas, that women can be trusted to like look after the ideas of men who came previously, and treat them with the reverence that they deserve. Women are still sort of sorted into followers, whereas men are leaders. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of ways in which these dynamics play out in the social level, and I think that to a degree, a part of this, partly it's related directly to the social division of labour within social reproduction, but also I think it testifies to the relative autonomy of the superstructure. That these sort of social structures, once they're constructed through like historical processes, they are extant, and they unfold and play out in a variety of interesting ways that might not be directly linked to the sort of social material world, I guess.
One thing I think is interesting about this is, for example, the default being men. We could also say the default is whatever dominant thing is in sociology, like default being white, default being whatever. Ironically, I am one of those people who thinks that, for example, white identity politics as a separate politics that is explicitly white identity politics is an indication of declining relative power, which is something that may be controversial. Does not mean that they aren't still the dominant power, for example, but it is, like, if you look at it, it's also directly related to a feeling of not being a demographics not going your way, et cetera, and so forth. But it seems somewhat interestingly distinct with gender when we get into other areas. So in this identification thing, or in this like what work is valued versus what work isn't being gendered, in the defaults of functions and all this, this is pretty standard for, we can talk about this in all identity categories. I mean, even some, like, if we get really specific, certain identities of certain kinds of white male workers would be more likely to speak up in certain contexts and similar patterns if we did very, very minute sociology on it. What I think is interesting about gender, and what you hit it on in the beginning, though, is it this ripples in other areas of people's lives in ways that everyone is aware of, and like you said, for example, the proletarian capitalist distinction can be obscured, but the gender distinction really can't be. But I think this also can make us view gender in too simplistic terms, right? Like, I mean, there's been studies, for example, and this is not to I'm not getting into the health of this or not. But the studies about the perceived feminization of severely overweight men, right? I'm actually going to use like terms that I wouldn't use personally, but are probably more politically acceptable these days, of fat men. Well, that's not an immediately gendered construct. I mean, in a way that, like, why would overweight men be seen? Yes, there's like biological proportional differences between averages between men and women of fat reserves and this, that, and the other, but like fat male trending bodies do not look like fat female trending bodies. So what is the gendered difference going on there? And it's something that's small and distinct, and yet it's very, like, people talk about it when it comes up in the literature on gender a lot, actually. So this brings me to the fact that like, it's almost impossible to find a single origin to talk about gender, or, from, like even though we talk about this distinction that's clearly obvious, we talk about the social reproduction distinctions that's clearly obvious, but the category seems way more complicated than, say, race, where we're most, but like, whatever the difference between Marxist and CRT people are, for example, and there's tons, we all kind of agree that race was a construct that, if you study, like, say, even like hard hard sciences, you go, oh, well, there's no correlation between, you know, skin color, race, and like phenotype, or even really morphology. Like, whereas with gender, there's a bunch of correlations. Some of them are biological, but no single one is definitional, so no single one can really explain everything. And I think this actually, you know, ties into like what you talk about, biological sex being actually a manifestation of gender ideology, because there's multiple factors going on there. Would you like to go into that? Am I interpreting you correctly even?
Yeah, I think there's a whole pile of stuff to get into here, so let's just like jump into it. I think that like, hey, first thing first, I think that like, the category of man, right? Let's start by theorizing the category of man. But I think the category of man is very interesting. And there's a lot of ideological work, right? The category of man is a privileged category. It's far more privileged than the category of woman in a certain way. And there are, I would essentially say that essentially what we have within our social gender construct is we have two spoken, a kind of bimodal spoken framework of gender. So we have two like spoken or socially recognized genders, and then you have a third unspoken gender. This is like kind of my kind of like pocket theorization here. And the third unspoken gender is essentially a non-man, non-woman discard category. So the way that I often term it is that even though I was not assigned, so I'm obviously a trans woman, even though I was not assigned woman at birth, I would say that even though I was like assigned male, I was not raised as a man on the basis that at a young age I was thrown into the social category of faggot, basically. The social category of defective, non-man sort of discard pile of social life. And it's essentially a third gender. Like it has a social function as basically being a regulatory structure for like the other gender categories. And so you have like a hierarchical relation between man and woman, and then you have a kind of like the gendered versus the genderless essentially being thrown out of the social category, which is different to being like genderless by like because of non-binary identity. I think it's worth noting. But like we I think that like I think the category of like the sort of like perceived feminization of certain groups of men, either because they are fat, or because they are like homosexual, or because there's a whole variety of reasons why one might be discarded from the category of man. And also women who are discarded from the category of women. So like, for example, if you're, say, a butch lesbian, you are not, you are often denied, your womanhood is often denied, people say you're not a real woman, people mistreat you on that basis, but you're not treated as a man. Like, butch lesbians are not given the social standing that men are given.
Ask a trans man who was a former butch lesbian how their experience is, and they will tell you a lot about that, I'm guessing.
Human societies have regularly constructed third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh gender categories. And almost always, that is to do with the social division of labor. So in my article, I use the example of the eunuch in Imperial China, but you could use other examples as well. The eunuch is like a social category of a type of person who performs a certain form of labor. And because of the cultural needs, or sort of, this is almost a functionalist kind of argument here, but because of like essentially the sort of development of these social structures, this third gender category emerges, where these people are essentially treated as a separate gender who perform these tasks. And we need them to be a separate gender because something about the other genders makes them unable to perform these tasks. So like in China, it was the role of like the imperial bureaucrat. And the reason why, if the eunuch was the imperial bureaucrat was because they were familyless, they were impartial, they were deprived of kind of the vigor of masculinity, which would cause them to act irrationally. And notably, not only were they assigned a new gender category, but their biological sex was intervened in. Physical changes were made in order to like make sure that this happened, which tells us that sex is being actively modified by gender. That the social, essentially, is determining the biological. And that, I think, sociologically, and as radicals, as Marxists, tells us a lot. It tells us a lot about what's going on here. Sorry, I went
Christian monks in particular, because it was a very long time before there was formal rules against it, would often castrate themselves so they wouldn't fall back into the role of their prior gender. Now I know this doesn't comport with people who have a third grade understanding of biology. Or people with like social ideologies create physical reality. You're literally modifying physical biological reality to comport to social categories all the time.
Yes, I said this in my article, right?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
So, like, let's take, for example, sorry for yeah. If you take the examples I give, leaving aside trans people entirely, right? Cis women, heterosexual men and women modify their bodies to pursue their gender roles constantly. So, let's take some examples. There are sort of an idealized feminine and an idealized masculine. They're products of social ideology. And men and women, if they want to be valued in their social role, are expected to adhere to these categories. Men work out and steroid cycle and do all sorts of things to their bodies in order to conform to a certain social reality. Women shave their legs and shave their arms and shave their facial hair. Cis women shave their facial hair all the time and get their eyebrows done and do all these social rituals, literally modifying the body, right? Your leg hair, your arm hair, your facial hair, that's part of your biological body. It's part of your biological sex. But, so-called sex, but it is modified constantly in order to achieve social goals, in order to adhere to social structures. And that is important. That is very, very important.
In the deadassery, y'all, watch the rest of this video. It will blow your wig back. And to give credit where credit is due, I did not play the whole goddamn video. So links will be provided in the description box for everything that I discussed in this video, and the video where I was using that as a reference to the points I will be making in my own video, this one in particular, will also be in the description box down below. And you wouldn't know that by the way that they present. And I know this to be true, not the redhead statistics, but I guess you can look it up. But I know what to be true is the intersex. Intersex is someone who is what they used to call hermaphrodite, which is a term people don't use anymore. But basically it's a person who isn't biologically fully male or fully female. They have aspects, especially around their genitalia, that's a little bit of both. And once you go into the deeper aspects of the genes and so on and so forth, you realize that things ain't 100% this or 100% that. It's kind of wanky in there. But nonetheless, the particular trans woman was basically like, there are more people who are intersex with not straight male or not straight female characteristics or somewhere in the middle than there are redheads. And when I thought about that, I was like, I see redheads, I know redheads. But then when I thought about it on a bigger scale in regards to intersex people, that means that as many redheads as you ever seen in your whole entire life, there are people who are intersex that you will never know. You will never be able to see on a physical aspect if they are intersex. You wouldn't know that. That's something that you would know or maybe never know, but if they do tell you, it's because they told you, as opposed to like you can physically see it. And when it comes to people, especially when it comes to gender expressions, you'll see people who express themselves as female, they'll express themselves as male, not only as drag or cross-dressing, but like just presenting in general. There are women who are more masculine presenting, kind of like Young M.A. She's a great example of that. Whereas there are women who are very feminine performing and very feminine presenting. So there's not much masculine traits to them, or they're just very dainty and traditional white patriarchy gaze of what it means to be a woman. They really play into that gender role. So when she said that, I was kind of like, okay, you got a point there. But then also, when it comes to this gender performance, because it's all a performance, when we talk about body modification, that's no different than slapping lipstick on your lips or shaving your legs and all these other performative things that women do to fit the gender gaze, to fit into the gender criteria. So gender is very much performative, and gender isn't as concrete as it once was. If you don't know, once upon a time ago, the color pink was associated with men, masculinity. It's over time and literally through marketing and propaganda, we've associated pink with girls. But rewind the clock, rewind the hands of time, 200, 300, 400 years ago, the color pink was associated with men. Today, or boys, the male aspect. But today, it's associated with feminine. Same thing, go a couple of centuries back, men were wearing wigs and makeup and things like that, and it was very public. It wasn't something like, oh, I'm doing it for the camera set, I'm doing it because I'm in a photo shoot. And I don't think back then they had photo shoots. But they very much did. I mean, y'all saw pictures of George Washington. Like, y'all seen the motherfuckers in drags and heels and wigs and shit. Like, that's just what that was at the time. Whereas now, those aspects are more associated with women. So we see how this is a performance. Even when it comes to sports, men and women are separated. And I understand why, because women's bodies are built differently biologically than men. I understand. However, even with those expressions, certain sports, we assume them to be relegated to women. And there's different expectations in those particular sports, whereas male sports are assumed to be more aggressive and they require you to be more in contact with each other. Whereas, let's say gymnastics, let's say women's volleyball or things of that nature, where it's associated with women, the aggressiveness is not expected. And when it does display, depending on the woman, let's say a Serena Williams, she's aggressive, she's manly, she's really a man. But when it's let's say her competitor, figure out the white woman's name who's the competitor of Serena Williams, who always keeps on failing. They keep calling her competitive. She's a great a sports person. You know, she's very feminine. She's soft. She could do both. She could play tennis on the field, but she's also very feminine. She is very much matching the white patriarchal feminine gaze, even in a sports arena. So what is the difference between Serena and this white woman? The difference is Serena is really good at what she does, and she's black, and she's more defined, and she does not fit into the male, gender performative, white, patriarchal, feminine gaze. Whereas this white woman, as trash as she is in tennis compared to Serena, but just trash in general, she gets the grace of being in a sports domineering, competitive arena career-wise, but still get the photo shoot and the good publicity and the good lighting and the media campaign. When she's off the court, she is deemed as feminine and fits into that white patriarchal male gaze of what it means to be a feminine woman. All things that are very fucking performative. Take it back to the everyday girls. We all shave our legs, especially in Western society, because shaving legs is a relatively new phenomenon. And then on top of that, it's really a Western thing. Women of other nations, especially nations that are considered third world, underdeveloped, you know, those countries that are being exploited by the imperial core, which would be like the United States, Europe, Australia, Canada, those performance of gender roles, especially for women shaving your legs and things of that nature, that is normal. But outside of the imperial core, outside of chasing the white male gaze, the white patriarchal male gaze, shaving is not required. Having hairy legs, just having body hair in general, hitting puberty and looking like a grown-ass woman is very normal, very acceptable, very mundane. And even when women are single, they are married, they have kids, they're overweight, they're skinny, they're tall, they're short, they're educated, they're uneducated, whatever the spectrum is, whatever category women fit into, for the most part, especially in these Western countries, women shave. Even when they're alone, even when they're not partnered, they still shave. That's performative. And it's performative because we know socially that is the expected version of what it means to be a woman. There's nothing grotesque about hair. There's nothing filthy about hair. It is biological. It's so normal that our bodies are set they have a strict regulation of when we even have all these body hair. This is why a 5-year-old doesn't have hairy legs, but a 15-year-old most likely does. It's called puberty. You have to go through a biological chemical change within your body, and that's not even something that you're consciously aware of. That's something your body does on its own time. But we still shave, and men don't feel the need to shave. And when men do shave, it's not to chase the woman's gaze. It's not to get the woman's appraisal. It's not because society says men need to shave. It's usually for their own gain, and it's usually in regards to sports, like Michael Phelps. A lot of swimmers, and male swimmers in particular, shave their legs because it makes them faster in the water. I don't know how true this is. I don't know how scientifically backed it is, but that's what men do. Whereas women do it because we feel awkward or we feel judged socially if we don't. And hair is hair. There's no male hair or female hair. It's just hair. But we still do the gender performance because we know the expectation, especially living in the imperial court. We know this. And I also feel, my personal point, I also think that a lot of men are very much arrogant, because not only patriarchy gives them the leeway to do so, but also men get to show up as raggedy, as handsome, as sexy, as musty, as whatever the fuck they want to. They show up. And even factoring class, just for the fact that we all live in patriarchy, they can come as is, bitch. No assembly required. As is. And that's the starting point. Like, you're male. That's just the basic requirement. Whereas women, we have to groom ourselves. And psychologically, on an unconscious level, it tells women that you being your authentic self, there's something weird, there's something wrong, there's something that needs to be enhanced and changed. And with this psychological programming, this is why women put themselves in their own cages, where whether we're talking about pick-meism, whether we're talking about what it means to be a good girl, a good woman, what it means to meet these social benchmarks, you got to be married by this particular age, you have to have kids by this particular age, like all of these confines and these mental gymnastics and these duresses and all this mental bullshit is what keeps women in this box that does not exist outside of their head. Whereas men just have to show up and it's all to the goodie. And let's be real, under patriarchy, real humans are men. And if we really want to get deep into it, real humans are white men. And if you want to call it for what it is, real humans are white, rich, land-owning, property-owning men. Everybody else is kind of like, How close are you in proximity to that standard of rich, white, land-owning man, property-owning man, for your respect and your human rights to be acknowledged and protected? But y'all not ready for that conversation. But back into the gender and sex normalities and roles, why wouldn't men feel arrogant if they know that they don't gotta shave, they don't gotta bleach their hair, they don't gotta think about they gotta get their titties and their ass, and they don't gotta do shit but literally just exist? Why wouldn't you feel arrogant when you know women have to live through these fleeting gazes? Always this fleeting mark, right? Once you get to, okay, you got to be a size 2. Shit, you got to be a blonde. Well, you can't be too dark. Well, there's always this loop and this hoop that you got to jump through like a trained puppy. Why wouldn't men be that arrogant if they know they literally can just come into a room and all hail me because I'm male? Meanwhile, a woman has to do above and beyond, and still she will get points off her score because she's just a woman. Like, think about that shit. And the goalpost changes for women. Because we just talked about simple things when it comes to the imperial core, when it comes to Western nations. But the beauty standards in America is not the beauty standards in Nigeria. So that's another layer of mental psychosis for women, because depending on what culture you're from and what culture and let's say race and ethnicity and all that jazz and religion and all that shit, factor all of that in. No wonder women are always fucking shape-shifting. No wonder women are always fucking manic. Because you're always trying to be something that you're not, because your authentic, bare, basic self is not good enough. Right? So let's say if you were Asian, let's say you were Korean, your beauty standard would to get the eyelid surgery to make them look more rounded. Let's say you're from Nigeria. The beauty standard is to be lighter skinned. So no matter where you are, if you have been imposed with colonization, imperialism, white beauty standards, and all patriarchy, religion, especially conservative, Abrahamic religions, and so on and so forth, all of those influences are telling you, you as a woman, there's something wrong with you just on the principles of you being a woman. Even, let's go back to the Abrahamic religions. You know, I stay my motherfucking foot on the neck of motherfucking Abrahamic religions. Let's just be clear. Your first fucking biblical motherfucking chapter, motherfucking book, the first motherfucking thing that you read in this fantastical, idealistic novel of so-called true events starts off with, this bitch ate the wrong fucking fruit because this goofy bitch fucked around and listened to a talking fucking snake. This bitch fucked around and fucked it up for all of us because of her committing the first sin ever, whatever the fuck that means. White patriarchy will tell you what that means. Because she's so sinful, she is a reflection on all things that's evil within this world. She damned humanity, and you can't trust none of these hoes. Because you know, men are so smart, so brilliant, so damn near godlike. But they stupid asses, since day one, forever and a day, have thought about their small head between their legs, then the big, massive, 8-pound brainy mass in their fucking cranium. Damn the XX, the treacherer by nature, devilish, Lilith, impure, damnation, temptress, Jezebel. But nonetheless, men are more superior than women. Moral of the story. That was the moral of the story, and that's how you start off your adventure, your journey into your religious oath, your religious commitment, knowing that women are your damnation, and if you're the woman, you have to spend the rest of eternity repenting for that damnation.
Anyone here objects to the marriage of these two fine young people? Let them speak now or forever hold their peace.
I object! What?
On what grounds?
On the grounds that this woman, his bride-to-be, has a pimple!
I said!
Mom? Stop it! She probably got dandruff too!
Meanwhile, motherfuckers with the XY, they out here killing, they out here coveting their neighbors' motherfucking wives, they're out here having half babies and half families, they out here presiding over if they should split a baby in half or give it to the wrong mother, like all this other extra shit, all these atrocities, all this warring, this bloodshed, because you know religion is a death cult. So like all of this shit is going down under the XYers, and we just gonna let that shit slide. But the very fucking book, the very first fucking book in your death cult sacred books starts off with women ain't shit, don't trust them hoes. And every other book following after Genesis reaffirms bitches ain't shit, you can't trust them hoes. From Delilah, from Lot's daughters, from Jezebel, like every other woman is defined by fuck these hoes, can't trust these hoes. But all the other motherfuckers in the Bible, all the other key players, they get to do what they get to do, and that's just that on that. Like, I think Eve has more salt and more shit on her name than Judas, who set Jesus up to get murked. Because this is patriarchy. And patriarchy will always side with the phallus than it ever will with the vagina. Even if they acknowledge life comes from the vagina, they still won't even give women that point of reference. Because y'all cult motherfuckers really do believe humanity started off with a fucking rib. Like, girl, scientifically speaking, that's not even fucking possible. Like, what the fuck is that? And y'all know this. Y'all know sex. A lot of y'all had sex ed. A lot of y'all fucked or been fucked and fucked other people. Everybody know that ain't shit popping off with a rib. But y'all will allow that to skate through because you rather choose a male rib than the woman's vagina. And y'all will live and die on the lie of a rib from a man than to give any credence to women. Because to acknowledge that life starts and ends with women would mean that you would have to treat women better. You would have to give women their credit, women their throne, women their authority. And patriarchy hates that. Right? I was thinking about it earlier this morning when I was taking a shower. TMI. I was like, since we know all the important genes come from our mothers, like the Y chromosome really isn't shit. It's smaller, it's parasitic, it doesn't hold any important data and information. But the X is where it's at. That's where the Y parasitically attaches itself to. The X is where all your data, all your information is coming from. Like, the genes that matter comes from your fucking mother, right? But if we know this scientifically, then that would mean socially we should be treating women like queens. And not even for the ego stroke, as opposed to the vessel of the future depends on women. Therefore, if we want the brightest children, the smartest children, the most progressive children, then we have to start off with treating women better. Because at the most bare basic capitalist interest, we got to make sure the next generation of workers gonna start off good. But of course, patriarchy would never actually consider that, because patriarchy really, really, really hates women. And then on top of that, if you acknowledge the importance of women, then you would have to acknowledge the over exaggeration of maleness. And maleness is not that great. And then you would have to start treating women like the gods that they actually are. We bleed once a month and here we are, still here. I know y'all want to believe in your Jesus resurrection shit, but we be bleeding, but we still here. Like, if that's not reincarnation, I don't know what the fuck is. Especially for the fact that it is the uterus lining, and then like our uterus is still there, and another cycle begins. If that is not resurrection, if that is not rebirth, then I don't know what the fuck is. But again, gender and sex is very performative. So perhaps we shouldn't hold on to what it means to be performative, socially acceptable versions of the ideal woman or the ideal man. Because we can all talk, me first on the mic, we could all talk greasy about how patriarchy is shit, but not only for women, but for men. Like, men gotta be trapped in the closet because they fear other men will kill them if they talk about their romantic interest, honestly. Men fear other men when they are convicted and have to go to prison because a man might try to yoke them up real quick. Men fear other men's retaliation if they actually are romantically involved with a woman in a healthy, successful, rooted relationship. They feel like they have to explain themselves. Like, why am I not being a toxic nigga? Like, why isn't my woman always crying and throwing fists? Like, why aren't we always making up and breaking up? Like, men fear other men in patriarchy. Men castrate men in patriarchy, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Men criticize other men in patriarchy. Men rob and harm and violently attack one another in patriarchy. Men are always trying to tell other men what's a bitch, what's a punk, what's a real man, what's an alpha, what's a Chad, what's a Brad in patriarchy. But let them little motherfuckers tell you, patriarchy is where it's at. Because Lord forbid men lived under matriarchy or under communism or socialism. God fucking forbid. Right? Because sex and gender is very much performative. And it's very much chasing societal's construct of what it means to be a woman or what it means to be a man instead of being your authentic human self. Because there's no construct for that, baby. You got to find that. You got to develop that. You got to curate that. You got to put your own special sauce on that. There's no hierarchy or etiquette for your true authentic self. Think about that. Like, under patriarchy, women's main concern is being quote-unquote wifed up, quote-unquote chosen, quote-unquote bagged. Like, our whole lives revolve around when are we really going to start our life? Because we know as women, our lives has no significant measure, dignified, anything until a man comes in, because that's when you really start your life. That's when your life has real valeur. When you are wiped up by a man. That's when you could be a breeder. That's when you could be a free cook, maid, sex object, and everything else that men women need in quotation, but really like exploit women for. Under patriarchy. Like, how many women have relationships with other women where it's not revolved around a man? Like, think about that. How many of y'all's relationship with other women is not about you crying about no trash ass dick, wanting some trash ass dick, healing over some trash ass dick? Like, everything revolves around a man. Because for most women under patriarchy, men are the standard. And like, your life has no significant value. You can't measure your own successes if there's not a dick around. Because of patriarchy. Men don't feel that way. Men are not waiting around for women for them to live their lives, to start their lives, to measure their lives, to define their lives. That's not it. Hell, a man might be in a relationship and still think that he's free to roam across the country searching for pussy to pussy from sea to sea. Look at A$AP Rocky and how he's putting Riri through all this humiliation. Because in men's mind, under patriarchy, there's no such thing as no. Whereas women, in our minds in patriarchy, everything is a no. You need a reason why it's a yes. For men, it's always yes. They need a reason why it's a no. And even when it's a no, they don't want to accept that no if that no doesn't register with their penises. Because we know men, they hear no, but they'll put a Spanish fly in your drink and hear yes. Because of patriarchy. Something I want y'all to think about. Like, I was just taking off my makeup because I'm coming back from a beer garden. Don't worry about it. But even as I was taking off my makeup and reflecting on what I just recorded, I was just like, the fact that I even got to do this shit. And don't get it twisted. I love putting on my makeup. It allows me to actually see myself, to see my face, to check in with myself as I am applying my makeup. And as a person who, when I was younger, had like body issues, it's important for me to have that one-on-one time and for me to actually see my face. But anywho, as I was taking my makeup off, I was like, the fact that there are women who literally will not leave the house without makeup speaks to the psychological programming that is patriarchy. Like, bitch, you won't even leave your motherfucking house for 2 seconds to get a fucking carton of milk. Ain't nobody seeing you. Ain't nobody important seeing you. Like, it's just milk. No one's gonna even remember that you was there. Like, bitch, just go get the motherfucking milk. There are women who will refuse to leave their homes because they don't have a full face of makeup. As if that's healthy for your fucking skin, the biggest organ on your fucking body. Like, what? The fact that society says you need to put on your face. Do men gotta put on their motherfucking face? Ashy, dry, stank, musty, big ass pores, pimples all over the goddamn place, patchy ass beard. No one says shit. But for women, the expectation is, don't let us catch you slipping that you got deep sunken eyes. Don't let us see you with your pimples. Don't let us see you with the stretch marks. Don't let us see you with the sunburn. Don't let us see you without your eyebrows being manicured or, your eyelashes on. All these performative, ritualistic gender norms that you have to engage in, at least to be seen and respected, to be seen and treated with respect. Because let's be honest, though I disagreed with pretty privilege, but attractiveness does get you far. It does open doors. Not the best doors and not necessarily longevity, because beauty is fleeting and beauty is objective. But nonetheless, it does something. But when society deems you to be like ugly, like the humpback of Notre Dame, they treat you like you're subhuman. And we've seen that before, how people are very comfortable treating people who they deemed less attractive, less human. And you wonder why women are always caking up their faces. Put on your face. That's not even something a man has ever heard, put on your face. I gotta put on my face to go get me a carton of milk. Like, that doesn't even exist. But it does for women. Why? Because if patriarchy actually saw women with high esteem, women would not conform to the status quo of what patriarchy says women need to be. If women really stood in their authenticity, really was like hair tied, chilling with no makeup on, and that was just like a la mode, what could a man say or do to you to have you shook when you fuck with yourself with your face fully made, and you fuck with yourself when you just rolled out of bed? You just fuck with yourself heavy. What kind of games, what kind of narcissism, what kind of bullshit could men play and pull on women if women had no fucks to give because they were keeping all the fucks for self? Now let me leave you with that on your chest and on your head. Let me let you reflect on that. You might fuck around and have the esteem of a Caucasian male. God damn it. You might fuck around and have the audacity, the arrogance of a Caucasian male. You might fuck around and discover that you have the unmitigated gall of being your true, authentic, agency, sovereign woman self. Now, what could a fucking man tell you about shit after that? God damn it. Go figure. And like every other video and like every other YouTuber, all links provided and articles, materials, references are in the description box, as well as how you can support me if you so choose to. And with that being said, y'all, I shall catch you on the next video. Peace. Oh, like, comment, share, subscribe, all that jazz. Comment down below. And then I shall see you on the next video. Peace.
All my bitches got hella ass and belly in the stomach. Yeah. Baby, do your thing. Baby, do your thing. Yeah. Say big old titties, let them swing. Little titties get sucked the same. BBL, all natural. You go, girl, it's your world. Just do your thing. Baby, do your thing. Look, if you bartending or you go to class, if you on the pole, if you throwing ass, you a CNA or a lash tech, hit your doggy style, lick your back sweat. Do your thing. Baby, do your thing. Look, hairstylist or esthetician, social worker, who else I'm missing? If your head good, if you're cooking bustin', don't compete with no other woman. If your back hurting, I'll hold them for you. Don't you get no breast reduction, baby, do your thing. Baby, do your thing. Black girl, if you a 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 black girl, do your thing.